So, how tall are TF2's mercenaries? Wow, that's the topic. What 6 years with no updates does to shut your mouth. This is actually an interesting topic, I swear. And the answer is not as simple as you might think. You can't just measure your screen and come out with the right answer. Heavy is 8.5 inches tall. Now, you might be thinking that we do have an official height chart for the classes. This image right here shows it all down to the very inch. But what if I told you this image was a lie? You've been lied to, it was just made up. It's the first thing that comes up when you Google TF2 class heights, and that does seem reputable enough. I've personally even used this height chart for reference when making the thumbnails of my TF2 class history videos. Maybe once, or twice, or 9 times. But that's actually what got me thinking, hey, what exactly is the source of this image? How do we even know it's right? If we go back and find the actual origin of this image, and I mean the one with the text, not the original just class lineup picture, but the one with the listed heights actually comes from a 4chan discussion on this topic in 2011. And look, we all know that 4chan is as reputable as a source can get, but even the original poster based it on, quote, the arbitrary assumption that Sniper is 6 foot 1 inches, or about 185 centimeters. And if that were true, it'd make the tallest class, Heavy, 6 foot 4 inches, or about 193 centimeters, and the shortest class, the Engineer, 5 foot 6 inches, or about 167.64 centimeters. But of course, this is all just based on someone's best guess from over a decade ago. Another guess from the same thread added a height marker that would make Heavy 6 foot 5 and Engineer 5 foot 7. But you can just adjust a height marker any way you want it. You can make Pyro 8 feet tall if you wanted. But the one thing we do know for certain, if it wasn't obvious enough in game, is that Heavy is the tallest and Engineer is the shortest.
Take it like a man, shorty.
But now we found out that the go-to height chart for TF2 is bogus. And by bogus, I mean it was someone's guess. They were trying their best. Trying their best at lying? But now what? How are we going to find their real heights? Well, I'll tell ya. All we have to do is use the game's actual form of measurements. The Source Engine's level editor, Hammer, uses units creatively called hammer units, and those can be directly translated into inches and centimeters. And a buddy of mine on Discord, DT, was kind enough to make me a model museum map that provides measurements for each of the classes. And these would be their heights rounded to roughly the nearest hammer unit. But what is the hammer unit in the real world scale? Well, one hammer unit is equal to 0.75 inches or 19.05 millimeters. And using that, we can now officially find out how tall TF2's characters are. For example, the Heavy stands at a whopping 88 hammer units tall, which would make him
5'6".
Wait,
5 foot.
He can't be
5'6".
or 167.64 centimeters. According to the first result on Google, which must be the most accurate because it's the first, the average height of a human male is 5 foot 7.5 inches. You're telling me that Heavy, the big guy, the one who calls everyone else babies, is shorter than the majority of men in the world. That seems wrong, but in the most literal possible sense, it's true, he's 5'6". And if Heavy is 5'6", that'd make Sniper, Demoman, and Medic roughly 5 foot 3 inches, or 160 centimeters, Spy about 5'2", Soldier about 5 foot 1.5 inches, Pyro and Scout about 5 foot even, and Engineer, the resident Short King, would be 4 foot 9 inches, or 144.78 centimeters, which according to the Mayo Clinic would allow him to be classified as a dwarf. But yeah, those would be the heights of the classes in TF2 in the most basic sense. They're all short. But now I have to ruin the fun by stating the obvious, that the in-game units more than likely don't translate directly into real-world measurements. Unless Valve wanted to create a fantasy world where 5'6" is well above average, I think that it's safe to assume that's probably not Heavy's real height. So that means that now we have to venture outside of the game. Unfortunately, things like the NECA figures don't actually say what scale they are. Like how a Master Grade Gundam, for example, is supposed to be 1/100th the size of the real thing. But the general consensus seems to be that they're around 1/10th scale. And with most NECA figures being generally around 7 inches tall, that'd make the full-scale version 70 inches, or 5 foot 10, which is close to the average height of a human man. But the problem is that the TF2 ones are actually a bit shorter. Heavy is the tallest figure, and he only comes in at 17.5 centimeters, and that would mean that a full-scale Heavy would be 5 foot 8.89 inches, which is an improvement from 5'6", but it's still probably not what we were expecting. I have seen a few people say that they could be 1/12th scale, but that would make Heavy a little over 6 foot 10 inches, which is definitely very tall, but compared to the scale of the other classes, I'm not so sure. I kinda doubt someone like Scout is well above 6 feet tall. But a few of the gaming head statues do list a scale, like this Gordon Freeman one being 20 inches tall at 1/4 scale. But again, unfortunately the TF2 ones don't seem to have a scale listed anywhere. But from what I could tell, most gaming head statues are either 1/4 or 1/6, and the TF2 ones are definitely not 1/4, because they are smaller than 20 inches, which is 50.8 centimeters, by the way. I'm trying my best to use both, but if we are to assume the TF2 ones are 1/6 scale, that could give us an idea. The soldier statue is probably the best example because he's standing perfectly straight, and he stands at exactly 12 inches tall without his helmet. And at 1/6 scale, he would be exactly 6 feet tall, or 182.88 centimeters. And that seems very plausible. Though I don't think we know for absolute certain. But luckily, we do have one piece of TF2 merchandise that does have a definitive scale. The Heavy and Pyro robot figures are confirmed to be 1/6 scale. And the regular sized robots are the same size as the humans, which does give us a pretty good idea. And the Robot Heavy figure stands at 30 centimeters tall, which would make the real Heavy 180 centimeters, or 5 feet 10.86 inches. Huh. I mean, if you compare the size of the Heavy statue to the Robot Heavy is definitely smaller, even with the statue having its legs bent. So, ironically, the one that straight up lists a confirmed scale seems to be more inaccurate. I mean, I don't know about you, but I would much sooner buy Soldier being 6 feet tall than Heavy only being 5'11". But we do have one last hope, which comes from the last panel of the comic Ring of Fire, where we do see mugshots for both Spy and Scout, with Spy standing at 6 feet tall, and Scout around 5'10", maybe a little bit shorter without the hat. And this is the closest thing we have to an in-universe confirmation, so I guess I could have started with that. But let's be real, that's less interesting because these are drawings. And some of that's inevitably going to be left up to the artist's interpretation. For example, in the model height chart, the very top of Scout's head comes to the bottom of Heavy's nose. But when drawn together in the comics, Heavy consistently towers at least a full head taller than the Scout. Heavy even dwarfs Soldier in some of the comics. The point just being that drawings will naturally be more exaggerated versions, which maybe doesn't give us as definitive an answer as I was initially hoping for. But if we are to believe the mugshot of Spy is accurate, that does give us a pretty great idea of how tall the other classes are. Not only does he stand at a perfect 6 feet tall, which, as we all know, is the perfect height, but Spy is also dead center of the height chart. And with each of these segments being a foot, maybe we can determine the class's heights once and for all. Engineer, forever our short king, comes in at 5 foot 6 inches, or 167.64 centimeters. Pyro, the second shortest, is 3 inches taller at 5 foot 9 inches, or 175.26 centimeters. Scout is 5 foot 10.5 inches, without his hat, which could call into question his mugshot, where he just barely stands at 5'10 with the hat. But he's also kind of posing there and maybe not standing perfectly straight, which could make up the small difference. We'll say it's close enough. Soldier is 5 foot 11.5 inches, or 181.61 centimeters. So you have the manlet 5 foot 11.5 inch Soldier versus the Chad 6 foot Spy. Medic also stands at 6 feet, or 182.88 centimeters. Demo is 6 foot 1/2 inch, or 184.15 centimeters, although he is wearing a non-removable hat, which could potentially add a small amount of height. Sniper is 6 foot 1, or 185.4 centimeters. And Heavy is 6 foot 4 inches, or 193.04 centimeters. Which would make all of the classes, except for Engineer, taller than the world average, and the height difference between Engineer and Heavy, 10 inches. And that actually makes the 4chan guess, which happened several years before the comic, completely accurate. Very good guess on their part, and quite the roundabout way to get right back to the beginning of the video. And that would make the gaming head statues pretty accurate to being 1/6. It actually works out pretty well for the NECA figures being 1/11 scale. Though I can't make the 1/6 scale work for the Robot Heavy, it's just not quite accurate. But if Heavy is in fact 6 foot 4 and not 5 foot 6, then that actually alters a lot about what we know about the distance of things in the game. Their feet in inches aren't going to be our feet in inches. Everything does have to be adjusted. And I think it would actually be really fun to see how that pans out for the exact speed of everything in game. That could be a whole video on its own. But this video is actually running way longer than expected, so I'll save that for another video. So we'll end this one off with some converted measurements for some other things in the TF2 universe. If I did my math right, adjusted for real world sizes, we'd have to multiply the size of each object in hammer units by about 1.1566. For example, that'd make this 42 hammer unit level 1 sentry about 3 feet 0.4 inches. A level 2 sentry, 3 feet 8.24 inches. And a level 3, 5 feet 4.19 inches. And what about the giant robots in Man vs. Machine? This does show all of them, but giant engineers, snipers, and spies never actually appear in any missions that I'm aware of, so we're not going to count those. But a giant pyro would come in at 8 feet 6.35 inches. A giant scout, 8 feet, 9.8 inches. Giant soldier and giant demoman, roughly 8 feet, 11.56 inches. Giant medics, 9 feet, 0.4 inches. And a giant heavy comes in at 9 feet, 3 inches. And that is really tall, but for a real world comparison, that's about as tall as a bus. Which to me makes it actually seem smaller. And a tank comes in at a whopping 12 feet, 9.5 inches. And DT was even able to estimate roughly how big the MVM carrier tanks are. Coming in at 1,751 hammer units, that can be translated into 126 feet and 6.9 inches. Roughly about the size of a 10-story building. So that gives you an idea of what the mercenaries are up against. If you are to believe the size of Saxon Hale as he appears in Versus Saxon Hale, he would be well above 7 feet tall. But that's definitely not lore accurate. He appears to even be maybe a little bit shorter than Heavy in the comics. But the comics do also exaggerate Heavy's size a bit. So yeah, again, we're probably not going to know anything for 100% certainty, but Spy has always been a relatively regularly proportioned guy by TF2 standards. So if the comics show him as being 6 feet tall, and that also lines up pretty correctly with our assumed size of the statues, I think that's as accurate as we're going to get. I do kind of wish the original guest-based height chart was at least a little bit wrong, because that is what made me go down this whole rabbit hole and probably would have made for a more exciting outcome, but the guy was dead on with his guess. And hey, that's how it goes sometimes. And this is one of those videos that kind of just snowballed based on a niche idea that kind of popped in my head, and those end up being some of the most fun to make. So I will probably end up following this one up with a video on how fast the mercenaries are in real-world units, and I think that would be fun, so let me know if you guys want to see that. But thanks for watching. Special thanks to DT for making the map, and also my patrons like Varric, Captain Forex, Egox, Colonel, Probably Vinegar, Caponicus, Kelso the Pirate, Pillsman's Fox, Some Crazy Idiot, Ozond, She-Shells, Salt God, Lavi, Taupe, Time Consuming, Man344, Nolan46, and Melody Chi. Alright, peace out, dogs.